Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Medical Talk. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Abdul Waheed. Dr. Waheed is a residency program director for the Family Medicine Residency Program at the Good Samaritan Hospital. And I'm very honored to have him here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Anusha, for inviting me to the forum. It's a pleasure. Whatever I can share, that would be helpful. More of this is just kind of excitement that my message, my talk may go to some young minds and may influence some in the positive direction.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. It's an honor having you here. So we usually start by talking a bit about early life. Where were you born and raised, and what was your early education like?
Um, I was actually born in what you would consider area. It was basically right on the border, eastern border with India, outskirts of Lahore, and I was there till I was 10 years old, and you'll be surprised that I didn't have any schooling until I was 7.5, kind of a kid in the village, kind of running around, climbing trees, doing my own thing. It was a lot of fun. And one day, my dad was trying to establish business in Lahore, a city, and one day he returns, like he would visit us every third or fourth night, and he comes home. He had just visited some of our relatives, and one of my namesake, my cousin, was like reading like full sentences. He saw him and he came back and was like, hey, come here, what you been doing? And all of a sudden, I was one of the seven children, right? And the focus shifts, and I didn't know any alphabets. I was like, oh my god, we got to do something about this kid. So he started teaching me then, and he taught me, like, the alphabets, and there used to be like ye Urdu ka qaida pehla, aur usme alif be pe and all that. And then within a few months, and then my older sister, Baji Asi, she took over. She taught me, Urdu ki pehli kitab, and so on and so forth, and counting the basics. And within I think 3 months, I was like pretty up to date. And then I think that by that time it was like October probably of that year, and the schools were like gone quite a bit. So he took me to school to get me admitted, and we go there, and they look at me and they're like, oh, he's at age that he should be in like grade 2 or something. And my father said, like, take his test. I mean, if you think he's fit for grade 2. So they took my test, and I was able to perform like kind of so-so for grade 2. So they put me in grade 2 directly. And then something happened, and the government changed their cycle of it changed twice actually during my elementary school. It changed twice. Instead of like the March exams, they changed it to December exams. So lo and behold, like, after 2 months of like being in school, there's exam for second grade, got promoted to grade 3. And and all of a sudden, I jumped, almost like in 3 classes with a kickstart. And then the same year, my father's business kind of started getting established, and he moved us from there closer. Although it's closer, but it's still, relatively larger town. It's called Kanakacha. Now, Kanakacha is also sometimes like perceived by people, or sort of a metaphor for sometimes backward areas, but it's pretty close now. Lahore has grown so much that it has engulfed it, and the Greenlands are gone. It's all populated now. But yeah, so I did my schooling, just to cut short, in the public schools, the ones that we call art schools. And I was fortunate enough to do well in the school, and then ended up in Government College University Lahore, which is again a great place to be. And I think that shaped me for the future. And then from there, I went to AKU Al Khan University for medical school. I graduated from medical school and then practiced in Lahore for 4.5, 5 years. mostly at Gangaram Hospital, um, and uh, and then like I moved to US for residency, and here in South Central Pennsylvania. It used to be Penn State Good Samaritan Hospital residency program back then, and I trained here, then became faculty. And I think a couple of years after the partnership between Good Sam Penn State broke, and then Good Sam became part of WellSpan Good Samaritan Hospital. That's what we are now, WellSpan Good Samaritan Hospital. And they started their own program, family medicine residency program. And in October of 2017, their program director left, and they approached me when I was at the Penn State Hershey Medical Center to come over or consider coming over, which I wholeheartedly accepted to go back to what I consider my home. And I've been there now for 5 years, as you can see.
Yeah, that's a very inspiring journey.
I would say it's just a sheer privilege, and this I owe this to a lot of wonderful people, my in my family and outside of my family and friend circle, mentors. There is a whole village. I can start naming, and we can spend 30-40 minutes just I'll talk about them, who've sort of put their 2 cents and enabled me to get where I am.
That's very inspiring. So you have been a program director at your program for the past 5 years. What do you love about your program? And what are some of the things that you enjoy the most about being a family medicine doctor in the US?
Family medicine is a very fulfilling field. You'll be surprised, like if you read my personal statement. I was cleaning up some of my documents. I came across like the saved paper from so many years, the personal statement that I wrote for admission to AKU. And I didn't even recall, and I looked through and I was reading through, and it was like, and I inspired myself again, just reading that, because it was all about taking care of rural area and patients, or those who are underserved, those who don't have access, and providing not only care but connecting it to what we now call social determinants of health. I mean, I didn't know the terminology back then, but I had understanding just going through some of those things that myself, my family, or seeing others go through. And so my close connection with the community was one of the influences, like going into primary care and family medicine. And I go back, even now, and back in my community, we have several projects running under a Shaul Foundation. Some of my friends, like who went through school with me, we have a library there, a community center. So that connection with the community, the specialty that connects you well, not only with the patient, but also patient family, and put it in the context of the system, family systems and community systems and health systems, is family medicine. So that's got me geared. And throughout my medical school at AKU, I think I performed probably relatively better, in community health sciences, and family medicine clerkship. Family medicine clerkship was the only discipline where I kind of reached almost to honors. Honor system in AKU is pretty hard to get honors. But family medicine was the closest where I got to. Uh, and then what I enjoy the most right now in family medicine, I'll tell you, like when I became resident here, I was one of the few resident. My program is located in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, which is about 30 minutes drive from Hershey, Pennsylvania. Hershey is where the Hershey chocolate, the famous chocolate company, is, and the town is named after Milton S. Hershey, who founded the Hershey Chocolate Company. And my clinic was located in Hershey because that's where the Hershey Medical Center, the main medical campus of Penn State, is. And after I became faculty, I kept my patient panel and my patients. I was practicing full scope family medicine. I was doing inpatient, outpatient, walk-in patients, labor and delivery. So I was doing it all. It was fulfilling. And one of the hardest things when I became program director was moving my patients, or moving myself and moving away from my patients, because I had developed like 10, 12 years long relationship with them. Actually, like, 3 months ago, I was in my clinic and I saw an 11-year-old kid for well child check. This is the kid I, was part of the delivery, the baby, him as a baby, and he was only 26 weeker. So
Yeah.
26 weeker, he stayed in NICU, long duration.
Yeah.
And his mom is my patient, his grandmother is my patient, so the whole family comes, and they're the ones who actually move their care from Hershey all the way to Lebanon when I moved my job from Penn State to Wellspan Good Samaritan Hospital. So I've about 10, 11 families who moved after me to, just to seek their care. So that's very fulfilling to be able to know my patients very well in the context of their family, their families, their community, and keeping that connection.
That's really amazing because I think family medicine is a specialty where you really connect with your patient more than any other specialty because they're coming to you, they have a very strong connection with you. So it's really fulfilling, I think.
Yeah, if the concept of family medicine, I would say you have a large audience in Pakistan. So I'm going to say it's very different from what you see, boxed as general practitioner, or the concept of community medicine. It's a very unique field, and family medicine believes in what we call incremental care. And incremental care, one of the pillars of incremental care is continuity of care. So you have long-term relationship. Patient keep coming out again to you for follow-ups, and you have long-term relationship, and that's helpful. You get to know them, and a lot of the chronic disease management is nothing but behavioral management. Behavior change. Talk about diabetes, talk about hypertension, all of the metabolic chronic non-communicable diseases. They're all about behavior management, and behavior management is linked with how the family structure is, and what do they eat, how do they eat, what kind of activity they do, and how they do. It's all interconnected.
You can really change someone's life and their mindsets by being a family medicine doctor who has an impact on the patient.
Absolutely. And I also wanted to comment on the second part of your question, was like, what do I like in my program? There are many things, but the first and the foremost is the people who make the program. Program is not walls or things; it's the people and the structure that holds the people. So both the structure that we have a tradition of over 30 years for training family medicine residents in our hospital, and we have a strong support from Wellspan Health, which is our integrated health system. They're really primary care driven, and their mission is embedded in health for all, and lifelong. You read the mission statement, it's like, providing health for our communities. And my program mission is embedded in our parent organization mission, which is we produce compassionate and competent physicians to fulfill that mission. And while doing that, we provide the care to our communities as well. And it's an ideal place in the sense that it provides you access to both rural and urban populations. It's strategically located in a place where you have pretty easy access to both types of populations, and you get to work with them. And at the end of the day, when you graduate, you're ready. It's rigorous in terms of its standards, and I won't say, like, sometimes people think, oh, easy route, but it's not an easy program from that perspective. Training is pretty rigorous. You can expect to train in rigorous and intense standards in outpatient, inpatient, labor and delivery, if you consider to come to our program. And we have a lot of focus on understanding data and being data driven. Our residents do a lot of scholarly activity. We had 38 national regional presentations from our faculty and residents the last academic year, and 7 peer-reviewed articles, including 1 in JAMA, and 1 in telemedicine, e-health, 1 in obesity science and practice, like some of the high-end journals as well. We just had another one in JAMA. So residents in faculty, they have very high standards. And an interesting thing is the person who just published in JAMA, our former chief, Derek Bachman, he didn't have a lot of experience coming in research. And our mission is not to produce researchers. We just want people to understand data, and because the future is that you should be great in bedside manners and one-on-one care. When you're in patient exam room, you should be able to connect with your patient. But also there's expectation that you should be able to manage all of the population of patients that you have. So that's the whole concept of family medicine primary care. You have a patient panel, and we can't go in an exam room and see what you're doing. What we're going to do is we're going to look at your panel. Like, you have, for example, a panel of 2,000 patients. How many of them are diabetics? And those who are diabetics, are their A1Cs under control? Like, what is their average A1C? What is their CKD stage level, and so on and so forth. So the benchmark marks which are out there, you should be able to look at those, be able to collect data, plan an intervention at your population level, and be able to improve the quality that you provide.
So moving on towards the residency and match applications, what was your match experience like, and why did you decide to move to the US? You mentioned that you worked in Lahore after graduating. When did you make the decision of moving to the US?
It's a long story. I'll give you a short version. So the last day at AKU was October 30th, September 30th, 2005, and then the typically AKU convocation is November or December.
Yeah.
And 3 days before the convocation, everything was ready. I was going to go, and my father had a stroke. And so I didn't go there, and that was like kind of life-changing for me and my family in many ways. But thankfully I stuck around my family, and my father, thankfully, alhamdulillah, he didn't have any deficits after. He did well. And then I got, through my friend, I got into Gangaram, and I kind of stuck around there for a bit. I got comfortable with people I was working with. It was a great environment, until, like, you can see years later. I was, while I was there 4.5 years, I was providing all kinds of primary care to my community. I would come home from Gangaram Hospital, like 3-4 p.m., and I would see like 10-15 people waiting for me. I would see them out of my drawing room, like from my home, and just write prescriptions, or refer them or whatever. I also did a bunch of home visits, friends and families, without any kind of formal practice. I was doing that just to help around, and I didn't charge anyone because I didn't have any system of formal practice. But I felt kind of short in some ways to provide some of the care that I needed to provide. Like, for example, in our neighborhood, we had a young 40-year-old female who I saw for breast pain, and who they had seen like a couple other physicians around, and they were like kind of, I'm going to say, beating around the bush for 3 months. And they will get dicloran injection or some kind of painkillers. And I saw her, and I sent her for mammogram, and she came back as stage 4 breast cancer. And I sent them, I didn't know Shaukat Khanum as much that time, so I sent them to Shaukat Khanum. They staged her, and they didn't take her because it was stage 4. And now they brought her back, and within days she started deteriorating. And and I had the challenge of providing her like end of life care and palliative care, and I felt very short, other than just injecting nalbuphine or giving some painkillers. I had nothing. And then several other things, small outpatient procedures and whatnot. And I felt like I needed more training. So at some point, and all of my friends were here, so there was some kind of peer pressure as well. There was also a story kind of during second year of my medical school. I came to Tulane in the Department of Biochemistry. I worked with Dr. Landry, Sam Landry, for 3 months for a research internship. So at some point in my career, I was also like kind of drawn towards basic science research. But as I went to clinical years, my focus kind of went back to primary care and interest in primary care. But these 3 months here with Dr. Landry and understanding like the scientific method also had influence in me. So I wanted training in the sense where I could get back to academics. So for the match, I had no idea. So I started asking my friends, like who had already, either some of them had finished residency or some were in the residency. One of my seniors was actually training here at Good Sam and in family medicine. So I contacted, he just gave me Zohair Mapara, God bless him. He gave me his list of programs where he applied. He was a couple of years ahead of me in medical school. So Zohair Bhai gave me his list. I just looked at the list and applied to those programs. That's what I did. I had no idea. But others significant, like my classmates from AKU, like some of Fawad Aslam or Moise Khan or Osman Tanveer Malik or Junaid Ali Sayed, or I'm gonna keep naming Hussain Mahmood. They helped me kind of with some of the other nitty-gritties of match, and finally I started interviewing. And Good Sam, Good Samaritan Hospital actually offered me an out of match position. This was my fourth or fifth interview. I had a few more afterwards. So at those days, I think the programs were allowed to offer out of match position and then adjust their quota in the match. And now that perk or privilege is gone. Either you have to be in the match, an RMP, or you not. So you can't have, kind of two positions in and one position out. It doesn't work like that. I took the pre-match and saved the day. Rest is history. It's a great place to be. South Central PA is beautiful. I think part of the thing is, like, when I was growing up in school, I used to do with Boy Scouting. I was actually Shaheen Scout of my school, and went all the way up to the last badge of Scouting. So we used to go for camping in Goda Gali Murray at the every summer we would go for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks of camping, or I forget like how much. But every year, and it was a fascination, going to the mountains and hilly areas was sort of fascination to me. And I always wished like if I could come back in the winter to see snowfall. But it never happened. The school would take me, for the camping. So when I came here, it was kind of dream coming true. I really loved it. It's beautiful. The landscape is awesome. The weather, you have 4 seasons, and right now it's very pretty. I can look outside my window. The fall colors, they're excellent. And yeah, so that was one of the scene, and then it's very close to bigger cities. It's rural, but it's close to bigger cities. And you have access, so I don't have to deal with the traffic and busyness. But on the weekend, like for example, my wife has family and friends in Brooklyn, New York, so we travel very often, almost like once per month on the weekend, which is good.
That's amazing. It sounds like a very beautiful place. The thing you mentioned about snowfall, I am also from Lahore. We used to go to the northern areas of Pakistan a lot during the summers and even during the winters, but I've never seen snowfall in the north, and I've always wanted to see it.
Yeah, it's magical. I'll tell you, like over the years, like living here, some of the snowstorms, you're like, oh man, like you have to go clean and whatnot, and then sometimes you get stuck. But snowstorms here are not that bad. I think 2 or 3, which are kind of will make the mobility stop. But most of the time, it snows and it's not as bad.
Sounds like a beautiful place. As a residency program director, how do you weigh the different components of an application to offer interviews to applicants?
Anusha, it's different from program to program. Every program has a method of looking at things, and some of those are very mission driven. Like my program, we are very mission driven because our curricula are linked to our mission, the needs of our community, and we really define the fit. You will hear this from a lot of program directors and a lot of programs. They'll say, this person is going to be a good fit in my program. And a lot of the time that's just all gut feeling, okay, this is good person going to fit in well. We've actually defined our fit in terms of rubrics, and then those rubrics are linked with the score, and that's what we use for ranking and for scoring and appraising the application and the applicants. So for example, our fit is I always tell when applicants ask me, or future residents ask me, I say we are here to recruit, train, and retain, because we are here to fulfill our mission of taking care of our communities, right? So we are here to produce competent, compassionate physicians who will be able to deliver primary care and care to the families in our communities, which is evidence-based and practical in the context of complex healthcare systems. So this is like literally these words are coming out of our mission statement. And so really we want to have people who have potential of being competent and compassionate. So that goes back. Compassion, there's not one scale you can judge compassion. Talk to people, in the interview you can judge, and their commitment to family medicine, their commitment to primary care, and their commitment to coming to our community. So there is retention factor. We really want to retain people. So we look at their links in Pennsylvania, or even if they don't have link, how likely are they, to be able to stick around. And then competence, they're a different level, like their program, their performance in medical school, USMLE score or COMLEX score for osteopathic students, and so on and so forth. So that's how we define our fit. And a lot of other programs do the same. Sometimes some programs have okay, our average USMLE score in the program, the current residence is like step 2 CK is 230. So that's our cutoff. So that's where they start reviewing applications. So it varies from program to program.
I think being a good fit, as you mentioned, is very important, because you have to spend a lot of time with the people working at the program, and you have to be there, and it becomes like your family. So you have to be very comfortable over there.
Yeah, and that's what I encourage future residents is, you would be spending 80 hours with these people. Just think about it, 80 hours per week with these people, and you want to go to a place where you'll feel like fit. Don't feel like, okay, this is 3 years or 4 years or 5 years grind, and I'll just get through and get out at the other end. One thing about US is, like, they call it land of opportunity for no reason. There it is land of opportunity. You'll find what you need if you kind of keep your focus and keep looking and be perseverant. You'll find it one day. So don't settle for something which is not going to work well and where you won't succeed.
You mentioned that there is a certain step 1 or step 2 score that programs look at. Now that the step 1 exam is pass and fail, what do you think that applicants can do differently to stand out among all of the other people who are applying for the match?
It's a very interesting question. And again, I don't have I'm going to say kind of a final argument on this, because people going back and forth, and I see it in residency program directors forum, all kinds of discussions, and but yes, like, people are focusing a lot more on other quantitative elements in the application, which comes out to be step 2 CK.
Apart from the step 2 CK, we have research when it comes to applying for the match. As a program director, what are your thoughts about the number of research publications that an applicant has, or the kind of research experience that they have?
That's an interesting question. Recently, I saw a Twitter trend where people were talking about, like, oh, it's a checkbox for program directors. I'll say it's not a checkbox for program directors. I've had a lot of great residents who had no research experience. They had no publication to begin with, and they were fantastic. So the reason research is considered like one of the elements in the application that people should pay attention to or focus is because it shows your ability to start a project and end it. and then understand the data, scientific methodology, being scientific in approach, analytical thinking, critical reading. So all these skills are evident there. But like if you think that this is a checkbox for program directors, you're going to keep it a checkbox for yourself.
Yeah.
If you keep it a checkbox for yourself, like it takes only 30 seconds for an experienced program director to judge that, because they will ask you questions about that. And you can't just some of the other anatomy, at the end of the day, you cram some facts and go and deliver them. You can't do that with research papers, because they can judge your analytical thinking in many ways. So to learn that and going through that process, then focusing on certain number that you must have. But I'll say this, over the years I've seen a lot of growth. When I applied, I had, I believe, 8 publications, and I had 4 or 5 kind of in the pipeline.
Yeah.
And everyone who saw my application, they were like, whoa, where did this person come from? There were others from my class, like from AKU, who had more. Fawad Aslam, I remember, had 15, 20. I've quoted him twice, so I'm going to send him this. But those days, it wasn't that common for, especially like US grads. US medical schools, you hardly saw someone unless someone was in a research track or some dual degree programs. But now I see, everyone has some stuff on the CV, like 3, 4, 5 publications. Sometimes it's amazing to see how much people achieve. And also I see people doing a lot of other great stuff, like in the community, entrepreneurial work. I see that, and that kind of reflects on the capability and ability, not only so there are 2 words I sometimes use, is like competence and accomplishments. You can claim to be competent. Accomplishment is something that you have to show that you've done it. And over the years, I've seen the quality of applications and the quality of applicants has really risen over time. And I think that comes from the cognition among students that it is a checkbox for program directors. It is not a checkbox for program directors. I'll tell you. I don't magically, like, okay, this person has 12 and this person has 8 publications, I'm going to take the one who has 12. Or this person has 0 publication, this one has 2, so I'll take the one who has 2. It's not that it's not a magic. And you have to come out of that cognition that it's a checkbox.
Moving on from the research experience and the STEP scores, there comes the personal statement when you're applying for the residency match. And usually when I go on Twitter, a lot of applicants are talking about how it's very difficult for them to write an impactful personal statement and project all of their thoughts onto paper. So as a program director, how do you see a personal statement, and what is the importance of the personal statement when you're looking at the application holistically?
Personal statement has to be, by its name, personal. So it should be able to tell your story. Tell your story to the specialty that you're applying. Tell your story, why medicine is important to you. I actually advise people not to use templated personal statements and not to utilize some of the online businesses that would tell you, okay, we'll give you your personal statement, we'll help you. Finding help is find that help from a mentor, find that help from someone who might be able to edit the English. Use Grammarly. I mean, Grammarly is like free online source. Just use that instead of hiring someone to do that for you. Sometimes I see personal statements like cores and scores of personal statements which are similar. Like sometimes their domains are similar, and it's like, whoa, this person is like, this part of the world, the other person is that other part of the world. How did this happen? And that's because it's online forums. They get connected with businesses, and those businesses charge a hefty amount of money. Save that money for something else. Interview trail can be hard. So I advise against those. I say that you have to put the person and your personal stuff back into the personal statement, and don't keep it empty. And I can tell you, like, I was, as I started early on during this conversation, that I saw my personal statement for medical school like back from so many years ago. I was like very young mind. I didn't have a lot of exposure. I just wrote what I thought was the right thing, why I was pursuing something that was coming from my heart. That's all you need to do. And it should, for family medicine, I'll say your personal statement should really connect the person to you and your commitment to family medicine and why it's important for you to do family medicine and primary care. And I tell a lot of people like Pakistan mein wo kehte hain ki wo jo bada doctor banna hai, and family medicine comes to them as equivalent of being GP. They're like, oh, general practitioner banna hai to idhar hi baithe hain fir, right? So don't stuff like that come and persuade you one way or the other. You have to connect the dots, and it should be a story. It shouldn't be lot of you don't need to use thesaurus in hefty words. Just keep it simple. Because simplicity is going to help others connect. It should be short. It shouldn't be more than one page.
A lot of students, what they focus more on is the kind of English they're using and the kind of vocabulary they're using. And as you mentioned, they make it a thesaurus more than a personal statement, and the connection is lost when the other person is reading it.
Yeah, one thing you would find in America is a lot of people like here, they use very plain language. It's very different from the British culture, the Victorian culture of like being verbose about things. Sometimes the vocabulary that I use in my day-to-day language here is surprising to some other people, because like we are used to it from our schooling and going through college, and we are forced to do that. But here people kind of function on minimal vocabulary, and they're not looking for that. It can be headache for some people, like if you see very verbose. And I'm not saying don't make it a good prose. Use good words. Articulation is an art. Articulation doesn't come in a day. You have to practice. But Americans tend to be simple and straightforward in some sense.
As a residency program director, a lot of people think that program directors have certain filters that they apply when they're selecting candidates, to shortlist candidates, to review the applications. Are there any filters that program directors use to shortlist the candidates?
Internal medicine and general surgery programs are kind of notorious in doing that, because they receive like unmanageable number of applications. And some of the other programs which are considered quote unquote IMG friendly, they have the same problem. Like, my program this year, despite that statistic coming from IRAS that there's 5% decrease in family medicine applicants this year, I received like 1,780 applications already, and I'm pretty sure it's going to grow another couple hundred. So I'm going to get to 1,800, 1,900, almost like 2,000 applicants, and it's only 7 positions. I got limited resources. I have 10, 11 faculty to three chief residents. And how much can we do? So we have a commitment for my program that we would go through all applications, even if it's cursory. We look through all of them and make sure that we review all of them. We don't just like keep some applicants, okay, they're not reviewed. But majority of the programs, they would do this. They would like, for a number of applications that I just told you, they would say, okay, we're going to filter. And the filter is not like kind of depriving someone. That's just a way of finding a cutoff for a merit. You have to draw a line somewhere. So usually it's a quantitative number, and quantitative number is basically the USMLE or COMLEX scores. There are some programs who would filter with the number of failures. So in my program, the first go around, we do that. Anyone who failed any standard exam, we sort of filter them out in our first round. And second round, we allow 1, and third round, we allow 2. So that we have anyone who's failed more than 2, we don't look at the application. Anyone who graduated more than 5 years ago, we don't review that application unless and until there was a reason to. And reason can be, basically, Usually the reason is that the person did some work with someone within our program, which is now very rare. For example, we had an applicant who had rotated with us and then went on to research track and did some research, and that cutoff for US grads is actually 2 years. 5 years is for IMGs, and this was a US grad who was 3 years out, was doing research and was filtered. But he had worked with one of our faculty back during medical school, so we knew. So we kind of made exceptions. So we have made some exceptions in the past, but routine method is that we don't review them. So that's you can call it a filter, but that's like a criteria for, in the common Pakistani language, is shortlisting.
There was this Instagram question answer session that we did on our Instagram page. Someone asked this question as well, that how do you explain the gaps in your application? So for example, if someone, as you mentioned, graduated 5 years before applying for the residency, how do you think that they can explain it?
Be straightforward, whatever you did during that period. If it comes out to be, I would say never ever lie. If you're busy with family or you had a health issue, that's what you had. Those who are in that kind of state, I feel for them. And you had a catastrophe like family or your personal, or for our female colleagues, sometimes they get married and the childbearing gets complicated or childcare gets complicated and they can't right away connect. Find a way, if you're in that stage, find a way to keep connected in one way or the other. Now, if you were not back in the day, don't try to backfill it or make things up, because making things up is not okay. And I don't want to give this religious tinge, but ultimately all of this is what you're going to earn livelihood and money out of, which you're going to feed yourself and your kids and your family. So you want to keep it clean, and not fill it with lies. And it's almost like cheating in the exam. So I suggest not doing that, because ultimately there will be some place for you, which is going to accept your straightforward answer that you had a family catastrophe, or you were taking care of your family or yourself, whatever it is. But if you are in that stage now, just try to find a way of being connected. Who are aiming to go, but they are preparing, quote unquote, for steps, which I don't advise that you just sit at home and do that. I suggest do something clinical, like even if it is like an hour a day, just do something clinical and stay clinically active, because you're going to lose your skills.
I think it's very important to stay in touch with the clinical aspect of medicine. What are some of the red flags in an application?
I've worked with, in some capacity, about 150 residents in one way or the other. And, the ACGME core competencies. Some of the hardest core competency to remediate or help someone is professionalism. Because it's linked with a lot of the time behaviors, and behaviors linked with personalities and how people grew up. And if the person is not cooperative, it becomes very difficult. So red flags, when we talk about, we look for those, like, is there going to be a behavioral trouble when the person comes in? And for example, a person with multiple failures, only in a standardized exam may suggest that the person just have an issue with standardized exam testing, right? And there's sort of remedies out there. In US now, the medical schools are paying a lot more attention. That would be caught. 5 years ago, it wasn't the case. We would get people struggling through and then getting to us in residency, and then we would figure out, like, what do we do with this person now? So we would send the person or suggest or advise to go get psychometric testing done and figure out if you have a test taking anxiety versus a learning disorder, so on and so forth. Now they're taken care in during medical school. That's not the case in Pakistan as yet. I think AKU just started doing that. They have some kind of help for students from that area, but majority of the medical schools that I know, they don't have any mechanism like that. So if we spot something like that, that's not as big of a deal, but we want to have a conversation with the future applicant and say, what do you think is the reason? And if you need any help in future. The other red flags are, if it is standardized testing plus issues in, when you're rotating in your clerkships, then that's a red flag. A person who cannot be polite just for a day of interview, that's a red flag. The person who can't just like sort of be present just for the day of interview, that's a red flag. If you can't, manage yourself for a day of interview and interaction, then how are you going to do that on a daily basis? And then other red flags in the application, again, not paying attention to the detail. For example, personal statement, as I was saying, as you're trying to get to consultants and this and that person, but your dates are off that you're writing and they don't match with like other, because you're trying to build a story which wasn't there. So if you keep it simple, you won't get into those. And those red flags, I don't deal with them very, very happily. I would want those people kind of not come to my program, like who can't be straightforward, who can't keep things straight.
That makes sense. You mentioned interviews and how interview day is very important. Now that the interviews are virtual, what are some of the things that you notice as a program director in an applicant, and what is your advice to people who will be appearing for interviews?
I think virtual interviews are slightly different, but the core is the same. The core of your interaction is the same. The only difference is the transitions are pretty rapid, and you're more noticeable than the other. So you have to really, what they say, up your game in terms of how you present yourself. There are some other recorded places where we've talked about, I think by Apana, that talk in detail about just focusing how to interview well virtually. But some of the things that I would want to kind of point out is how does your environment and background look like, and then the transitions. I tell people, like, if you're in a room, 1 minute may not feel that bad. People just kind of settling and you're coming in 1 minute or up or down. 1 minute of waiting on virtually can be lifelong for some people. It's like, oh, this person is late, and it would be only 1 minute.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind. Moment like this, it may not be a big deal in person, but like this is not a movement, So even subtleties like those. So practice a little bit, not to completely rehearse, but practice a little bit with someone you who can give you some feedback.
And talking to a camera is also very new to some people when it comes to interviews. So I think a little bit of practice will really help. So as a program director, what are your thoughts about the US clinical experience on an application? And a lot of people, because of COVID, especially from Pakistan, they weren't able to go to the US for hands-on clinical experience. So what are your thoughts about the observerships and tele-rotations on an application?
Yeah, they're helpful for all programs. Some understanding of US healthcare system is obviously important. Like we want people to come and gel in and be able to understand how the system functions. And if you had some experience, that speaks for it. Some programs have like sort of strict cutoffs, and again, those filter criteria for, we want 3 months of clinical experience. Those programs usually are very service driven. Their system relies on residents to provide and deliver that care, which is different from a lot of other places. Like my program, even if we didn't have residents, like it could still function. Its residency is only a small part of the whole healthcare system. For us, we can train people with the health system. We want more like understanding. So we don't have that kind of filter or cutoff that you must have this much experience. I think the clinical experience is more important than US clinical experience. If you don't have US and you're not able to come in, your clinical experience wherever you are, that's important. And then your understanding of US health system. There are many other ways of understanding that. So right now, if you're in interview trail, spend some time. You can watch some videos. These days, it's very easy. Like back in the day when we were applying, we didn't have that much access, and our access was reading articles and about healthcare delivery system and so on and so forth. I remember, like, when I interviewed, one of the questions was actually, what do you think about US healthcare system? And I was ready, just went on and on. But my understanding, that was from the reading. So read how it functions.
That's a very good point, because there are visa issues as well when it comes to us as Pakistani medical students. Some people just don't get the visa and they're unable to go to the US even if they get a spot for a clinical elective. So it gets very difficult for a lot of Pakistani medical students. But as you mentioned, I think everything is available online now. So you can just build your understanding around the healthcare system as well.
Yeah, if you're not, but if you didn't get a chance to come here, just find a way to understand, and demonstrate that understanding when you're interviewing. But you might be at slight disadvantage from other programs which have a strict filtering criteria. So I would suggest, like, not to apply those programs, because it would be waste of money unless and until you get okay from them. But the issue is, like, a lot of those programs which use filter criteria, they would also have a statement on their webpage: don't ask us questions directly, apply through ERAS. So you just have to kind of spend time to understand each and every program. There are nuances, like each program's way of reviewing applications.
When we're talking about applying to a particular specialty, a lot of people have this confusion that, as a program director, what are your thoughts on people who are applying to two different specialties? For example, if someone applies to internal medicine as well as family medicine, another program, what are your thoughts about that? Do you think it's a red flag for you?
It's kind of a softer red flag for family medicine. A lot of the family medicine programs. If you are applying between orthopedics and general surgery, they might not be as, like, sort of worried. If you apply neurology and internal medicine, they may not be as worried. Family medicine folks, they really want commitment and understanding of family medicine. And internal medicine and family medicine, sometimes people will say, oh, well, I could do internal medicine primary care as well, because internal medicine sometimes do general internal medicine and primary care as well, but it's mostly geared towards specialty care. So it's a softer red flag for my program, if I speak, but a lot of other programs are like that too. So I would want to have a conversation with that person, really, why do you think the two? So you should have a very straightforward, well thought of answer why both specialties, and how do they connect. The issue is, like, people don't want family medicine to be a backup, because a year later, once you have to go through labor and delivery, you have to go through nursing home, inpatient, pediatric, and you're like, a year later, oh, my passion is to do something else, and you're leaving the program. The most troubled person at that point is the program director.
I think you should be committed to the specialty you're applying to, and not apply just for the sake of getting into the system, because after you get into the system, after 1 or 2 years, then you feel like, I wanted to do another specialty, and then it's a problem for the program, for the patients, and for everyone else in the program.
So I'll tell you my own. So when I applied to family medicine.
Yeah.
I applied to 4 programs in the country, which were internal medicine, family medicine, double board. And there were only 4 programs. I don't know if they exist. I also applied to 3 internal medicine and preventive medicine combined programs. Now, if you ask me why I did that, I have a very straight answer, because that's what I wanted to do, primary care. And they were also primary care, and they were offering something extra. I was interested in going into academics afterwards, right? So the programs which were internal medicine, preventive medicine combined programs, they were offering Master of Public Health with them, and a board certification in preventive medicine and internal medicine. I would miss out on OB and pediatrics in those programs, but I was getting rest of the primary care and PH. And if I were not to get a pre-match from my current program, which was a blessing, I would have ranked the internal medicine, preventive medicine combined program, which was affiliated with Yale, as my number one. I hope no one listens to that, but it doesn't matter. So you have to have a reason why you're doing that. You can't just be like sort of that you have one specialty as a quote unquote backup, because backup is not going to work. You really don't back it up.
That makes sense, because backing up means that you're not really that passionate about your field, and then it will reflect in your work and your practice in the future, because it's a very long journey after residency as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. This is what you're going to do rest of your life. You don't want to be miserable.
What advice do you have for students who are very early on in their careers right now, for a second or third year of medical school, and they want to move to the US in the future?
I would say focus really well on your medical school work. Do well in what you do. Don't try to find a shortcut and shortchange your journey in medical school. Have lots of fun. The focus is draw a roadmap. If you really want to practice here, draw a roadmap. When would you like to match, and then trace it back. There is one, I believe, recorded video on roadmap to residency by the YPC from Apna that was really good. So I would suggest that watch that. And if you do well in what you do right now, that will pay you off in the long run. I've seen increasing number of applicants, especially from Aga Khan University, who now, and also I've seen one from Shifa this year, who actually complete their at least one USMLE step during their medical school. Some actually do both step 1 and step 2. And by the time they apply to match, they've done step 3 as well, which gives them ability to a little bit of an edge for getting into H-1B visa and so on and so forth.
When we're talking about the step 3 exam, now that the step 1, if pass fail, we only have the step 2 score. So it is beneficial if someone can take the step 3 before applying for residency. Do you think that will make their application better?
A lot of programs don't pay a lot of attention to step 3, but nowadays I think it might be a factor. The more quantitative data you can put on your application, if you did well in step 3. I always tell people who are a little bit out, a couple of years out of medical school or more, try to get step 3, because that can show that your medical knowledge is current, and your understanding, because there are long cases in step 3, your understanding of management and patient care is still current, and you'll do well here. Similar is those sometimes I see applicants who didn't match a year, and next year they apply again. You look at the application, still the same. It's like, for God's sake, you should have done at least step 3. Like, you had a whole year, and sometimes they do good clinical work, and I appreciate that, but sometimes they don't even do that. They're just sitting at home, okay, I'm just waiting for my flight to US. It doesn't work like that.
That makes sense. As a program director and as a family medicine doctor, how do you see medicine 20 years from now?
That's a very interesting question. I think that there is going to be a lot of change. And I tell people, sometimes during interview, they ask me, oh, do you see any change in your program? And it's like, yeah, change is constant. Don't fear change. Change is what is going to define healthcare system. And U.S. healthcare system, I think, struggled quite a bit through the pandemic. There will be major changes, and some of the domains where I see that practice would be very different is that you got to understand the cloud. You will be practicing out of cloud, which means many things, not just the telemedicine and telehealth. It is that the practice is going to involve your ability to access what I call, well, I don't call it, it's like one of my friend colleagues called it peripheral brain. You can't memorize everything, so you have to have a system to access information out there, which is your peripheral brain. Equivalent of that here, people use UpToDate all the time, but you have to be savvy to be able to access information, understand how that would apply to your particular patient population, and be able to implement it. So that's going to be one of the major challenges for practitioners in future. Number 2 is being population health driven, being able to take care of your populations that you take care of. People are going to, want physicians to be great in bedside manners in one-on-one care, but they also want them to be able to be accountable for the population that they take care. That's how physicians would be paid here in US. Sometimes that's labeled as value-based care.
Mm.
Third thing, or the third domain that I see right now is on the rise, no matter where it goes. Some people link it with, the kind of political environment and political debate between Republicans and Democrats. But I see it that no matter who is in the government, I think U.S. healthcare system moving towards value-based care, and the payment models are going to be different. You will continue to see mergers, a lot of big mergers, and complex healthcare systems taking over, smaller practices, kind of constantly disappearing. And you should be able to understand health systems, family systems, and community systems. So they all work in systems, and be able to integrate all of them and coordinate yourself. So being able to deliver complex care, that's going to be one of the challenges of physicians. And then team-based care is the last domain. Physicians, I hope, and that I hope and I expect that physician will continue to be the captains of the ship of the team, who would provide the care, but physicians would not be the only ones. You will see constantly, your care manager sending you a message that a few years ago we used to get offended. Will say, "Oh, your patient needs to be on metformin." You're like, "I'm the doctor. I got degrees here and there, badges, And same thing, patients are going to be a lot more well-informed than they before, or misinformed. They would come having read a lot of information or misinformation. So you should be ready to deal with it. Cyberchondria, the term that they kind of devised, it's on the rise, and you should be able to deal with that.
I think the future of medicine is going to be really interesting, and I hope that we can see that in the next few years.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us, and it was great having you here, Dr. Waheed. It was actually so insightful and so helpful, and I am so honored to have you here with us, and I hope that we can have you on this podcast again soon. Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thank you for doing this great work.
Thank you.